talk a lot about workforce engagement here at the Compensation Cafe. For example, we know that companies with highly engaged employees outperform companies with unengaged or disengaged employees. And by outperform, I mean they earn more profit, which is what most companies are trying to do. Now, I've worked out a formula that expresses the relationship between engagement and profit. So if higher engagement leads to higher performance and higher performance leads to more profit, we can say that higher engagement leads to higher profit. I call this the transitive property of engagement. What we talk about less frequently is workforce disengagement, and this is arguably the more important topic because it really helps underline why companies have a strong vested interest in treating people well. In fact, we can argue that engagement's a luxury. Clearly, not every organization is going to have a highly engaged workforce, and somehow most of them or many of them will still carry on. But you definitely want to take steps to avoid disengagement. And the reason is that disengagement's really expensive. How expensive? Well, there are the obvious costs, such as lower productivity and higher absenteeism, and you can calculate these. For example, a Gallup poll recently found that only 13% of German employees surveyed are engaged in their jobs. And they estimated that active disengagement cost Germany between 121 and 133 billion euro per year in lost productivity. Absenteeism is also pretty expensive when you consider that disengaged employers are about 28% more likely to be absent, and that every instance of absenteeism costs the company an average of 250 euro per worker. So you can do a similar calculation within your own company. Now, these are the more obvious costs. There are also some less obvious costs, such as the negative impact on company morale or on customer care. And the risk isn't that the disengaged employees leave the company. This isn't a retention issue per se. This is a staying issue. The risk is that they stick around. They may even show up and do their work adequately, but behind the scenes, subtly bad things are happening. For example, people may be afraid to tell you what you need or want to know, such as a customer problem or an issue with your product or services, or even a great idea. Passive resistance is another problem. We've all encountered, for example, customer care professionals who, while being perfectly polite, are nonetheless completely obstructive. And to me, this is a sign of a disengaged employee. Employees don't share information willingly. In some cases, they may even hide information. So cooperation takes a hit. Creativity obviously doesn't flourish in this environment. And basically, people can't be bothered. They show up, they do the minimum they need to do to not get fired, and then they want to get out of there. In fact, there's a pervasive atmosphere of unhappiness in a disengaged company. No one wants to be there. Employees certainly don't want to be there, and customers don't want to be there. And all of this is very bad for the business. It has a cost. So things like firing people with a termination notice on their windshield, making people work extra hours for no pay, cheating people out of their expected compensation. These aren't just unkind practices. They're also very bad for the business. And fortunately, examples like these aren't so common, but even more common and less extreme examples like micromanaging or hiring external people into all the best leadership roles, failing to develop your internal talent, and just generally treating people like cogs in a machine are bad for the business. Now, what's good for the business, of course, are things that engage employees. Developing people, showing people you value and appreciate them, letting them grow, letting them make decisions. In other words, good managers are good for the business. So I've come up with a formula that expresses the relationship between good managers and good business. If developing people is good for the business and good managers develop people, then good managers are good for the business. I call this the transitive property of good management. And what this means is that if you want to avoid having disengaged employees and ideally have engaged employees, you do need good managers. And you also want to think about compensating your managers a little bit differently. You want to compensate them to develop people because chances are that's not what they're compensated for today. In fact, in many cases, their best interest may well be to keep people exactly where they are. The takeaway here, not every company may aspire to workforce engagement, but every company has a vested interest in treating people well.